But most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Prime Minister Boris Johnson in Kiev today. He says we have to endure high energy prices as we support Ukraine and battle against Vladimir Putin. I just wonder, are you prepared to pay that price? Of course, we'll talk about the channel. Hundreds more Albanians crossing the English Channel again today. Why are we not resisting? Why are we not deporting them? And joining me on Talking Pints, Fleet Street veteran Paul Connew. But before all of that, let's get the news.
Thank you, Nigel. It is 7:01. I'm Tatiana Sanchez in the GB newsroom. Boris Johnson has made a surprise visit to Ukraine's capital to mark the country's Independence Day. Speaking with his Ukrainian counterpart Volodymyr Zelensky in Kyiv, the Prime Minister said he believes Ukraine can and will win this war. His visit comes as the country marks 6 months since the Russian invasion began. During the trip, Mr Johnson set out a further £54 million package of military aid and vowed the UK will continue to stand with Ukraine.
My essential message for you today is that support for your struggle to keep your independence is indivisible and will remain whatever happens in UK politics.
The 35-year-old man, believed to be the target of a shooting in Liverpool which killed a 9-year-old girl, has been named by newspapers as convicted burglar Joseph Nee. Merseyside police earlier confirmed he'll be questioned in connection with the murder of Olivia Pratt-Corbell. His arrest is for breaching the terms of his release from prison. Officers are urging anyone with information relating to the shooting to come forward. Meanwhile, in London, police investigating the shooting of an 18-year-old man have offered a £20,000 reward for information about his murder. Newly released CCTV footage shows a car involved in the shooting of Alex Iannakou, who died nearly a year ago. A new appeal for information comes amid a wave of violent crimes in the capital. The Chancellor says freezing the energy price cap isn't off the table. Speaking at a wind farm in West Lothian, Nadeem Zahawi said he wants to focus on helping the poorest of families. He also says the Russian president has been using energy as a tool against the British people.
Make sure that every pound is targeted and is stretched as far as we can make it, whilst we continue to support Ukraine in their battle against Putin. So targeting is important, and of course delivering the 37 billion, we're midway through that now.
More than 23,000 people have crossed the English Channel in small boats this year, more than double the number at the same time last year. GB News has learned another 500 migrants made the crossing today, with more boats coming in this afternoon. It follows a record day on Monday, which saw nearly 1,300 make the journey in 27 small boats. It's the highest daily total since current records began 4 years ago. TV, online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News. Now it's back to Farage.
Good evening. Well, not only do we have a major cost of living crisis threatening not just millions of households, but huge numbers of businesses that simply may not be here by Christmas unless they get some help or the price comes down, we also, of course, have an invasion. Yes, it is an invasion coming across the English Channel. And yet, the Prime Minister today, where was he? Well, of course, he was in Ukraine. It's 6 months since the start of that war and 30 years since Ukrainian independence. But don't worry, the country's been in good hands, absolutely. The Deputy Prime Minister, Dominic Raab, has been, well, have a look at this picture, because actually he's not really been running the country at all. No, he's been at a kids' play park for the day. Well, I'm sure that's all fine and dandy. But if you get the feeling the country is utterly rudderless, you would be right. And have a look at the threat we're facing. Have a look at this chart of natural gas prices for 2022. Now, you can see that we're now actually higher than we've been at any point in this crisis, roughly treble where gas prices were at the start of this year, and be in no doubt. However much we talk about sanctions that we put on Putin, the truth is he's actually beginning to hurt us economically far more than we are hurting him. But let's have a listen to Boris Johnson on our support for Ukraine and the cost of living crisis in Kiev today.
We know that the coming winter will be tough and that Putin will manipulate Russian energy supplies to try to torment households across Europe. And our first test as friends of Ukraine will be to face down and endure that pressure, to help consumers, but also to build up our own supplies. And I believe that as we come through this winter, our position will strengthen. And with every week, a month that goes by, Putin's position will weaken and his leverage will diminish. And that's why now we must continue and intensify our support.
Well, Boris Johnson there saying that Putin's leverage will weaken. I think about Boris Johnson's other predictions over the last couple of years. They haven't really been terribly good. Now, bear in mind today he's promised a further £54 million for Ukraine, bringing our total to £2.3 billion. But the real takeout from Boris Johnson's speech is that we will have to endure the pain of the cost of living crisis, and we will do so because we want to support Ukraine. And we abhor what Vladimir Putin has done. And I want to ask you at home simply, are you prepared to go on paying that price? Let me know what you think. Farage at gbnews.uk. And I'm not saying any of this because I think Putin's a good chap and Ukraine don't have a great case. I'm really saying that we've got ourselves into a terrible energy mess. Much of the problem we've got here is, in my opinion, a self-inflicted wound through our own sheer stupidity, short-sightedness, oh, of course, and bowing to that great goddess, Greta Thunberg. Yes, the geniuses in Westminster, from both the leading parties, are happy for us to go on exporting heavy manufacturing jobs and importing as much energy as possible whilst we could produce it here. So I wonder, could we get cheaper energy? Could we get better supply? Are there better ways of doing this? And my fear, my genuine fear, is that Putin is actually going to turn down those taps even more over the course of the coming months. And I think you'll find that European support for Ukraine, EU support for Ukraine, is going to dwindle. I can already see a different narrative in German tabloids like Bild. No longer is Zelensky the hero. They're now starting to talk about just how corrupt Ukraine is as a country. And I wonder whether Boris Johnson's successor will have the same level of support for Ukraine as he does. Well, joining me to discuss the price of all of this is Dr. Lawrence Haar, financial economist. Lawrence, it's a strange thing for a British Prime Minister to say, we'll take the pain, when we could, I'm suggesting, do something about it.
Thank you, Nigel. Yes, we can do something about it. The price of commodities, energy, particularly natural gas, has increased, as you showed earlier in the graph.
Yeah.
But if you look at the retail price of energy bill, and any of your viewers can go to the Ofgem website, there's a nice pie chart to see there. And actually, the raw energy cost, natural gas, is about 43% of the total bill. Whereas if you look at network charges and environmental charges, all these ways we're supporting renewable energy are actually as large, even larger times than the wholesale cost of natural gas.
So these are unnecessary taxes that we've lumped onto our bills to support renewables because we want to reduce our CO2 outputs.
That's correct, Nigel.
Which of itself does have public support.
We have a public support, but I think any government should be transparent and honest about what it's really going to cost to reduce atmospheric CO2 in the way we produce energy. The UK is 1% of global CO2, and frankly, nothing to do would make much difference. The way energy investors are making extraordinary returns. If you look at the Bloomberg index for investors in renewable energy, the hedge funds, the private equity groups, they're earning over almost 17% returns. How are they doing that? Because they're shifting the volumetric risk and many costs on to retail consumers who are actually paying for it. The way we're supporting renewable energy in this country is not fair to retail consumers.
Now, we've gone for wind in a big way. Boris Johnson boasting we've become the Saudi Arabia of wind, and all of that's fine and dandy until the wind doesn't blow. How much, in your estimate, how much untapped natural gas do we have?
The UK has significant shale gas reserves up in Lancashire. There's offshore, and even closer to the capital, there's shale gas in Surrey, which could be produced. We have significant reserves, and but the limits with regard to disturbances, ground disturbances from it, were set way too low, which actually curtailed and prevented much production.
And we also learned, didn't we, that the anti-fracking campaign was backed by Russian money.
Actually, I would agree with that, and I'll even take a story from my early career in BP. We found at BP that when the Canadians were trying to get their gas from Ontario exported to the lower 48 states, they actually supported anti-energy development groups in America. So the idea of using political adversaries against to support your agenda is not new.
You spent your life in the energy business, the commodities business, as an economist. What's your big shout out to the next Prime Minister? We think it'll be Liz Truss, we don't know, but what would your advice be? I mean, how do we extricate ourselves from this pickle we're in?
We have to be reasonable with regard to what we can actually contribute to reducing global warming. We're only 1% of global CO2, as I said. The way we support renewable energy is not fair to retail consumers. The volumetric risk of the wind not blowing and the sun not shining falls upon retail consumers. Having to pay for the backup to all the gas turbines running at minimum stable generation is not fair to consumers. That's falling them and should fall on investors.
It's the poor that are paying the price, isn't it?
The poor spend more of their energy out of their household bill on energy than say a middle class or richer person. They're probably living in rented accommodation. They can't put solar cells on the roof, and they probably have poor insulation. So yes, supporting renewable energy falls most egregiously upon lower middle income groups.
Lawrence Harr, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Indeed. Well, there we are. You see, there's plenty of people out there with a pragmatic approach who understand the industry, who can see the terrible, terrible mistakes successive British governments have made. Now, within the Conservative Party, there is now a group established in the House of Commons saying, hang on a second, this net zero stuff is crazy. And I sense in the country there's a growing number of people who, whilst they may think the idea of net zero by 2050 makes sense, are saying maybe just for the moment we need to put this on hold given the scale of the potential emergency that we face. And look, we're looking down the barrel of a recession, but if energy prices were to double again, I'm not saying they will, but they could, we'd then be looking down the barrel of a depression. That's just how serious this is. And as Lawrence explained, only about 43% of the cost is in fact the wholesale price. In America and elsewhere, they can produce much cheaper energy. But what's interesting is when I've been out around the country talking to Labour and Conservative voters, I have found the idea of being energy independent. Whatever means that is, it can be a mix, of course, of renewables and everything else. But the concept of being energy independent, I found to be overwhelmingly popular. Actually, I find it brings people together the way that Brexit brought people together from across the political spectrum. So what's happening on the centre-left of British politics? We know the Liberal Democrats, we know the leadership of the Labour Party are absolutely committed to net zero. They don't want to see any gas exploration. They're dubious about further investment in the North Sea and have been for a very, very long time. But I think perhaps one or two cracks are beginning to appear on the left of British politics. Lewis Perry, Director of Climate Change Skeptic Group CAR26, has been looking at this.
Yeah.
People in trade unions, and trade unions themselves, they want their members to have well-paid jobs.
They certainly do, and they want them to have well-paid jobs and to have some money left over and be able to heat their homes and to be able to feed their children. So, yeah. So Gary Smith has come out, the head of the GMB union, as saying he's very supportive of fracking, and that hasn't been very widely reported, has it?
Now, the GMB, I think, are the second biggest union behind Unite in this country.
Well, they are. But
a major funder of the Labour Party.
Major funder, but, you know, it goes against Keir Starmer's net zero messiah narrative.
So why is no one talking about this?
Well, because, you know, all the mainstream media want everyone to think that everyone's very supportive of net zero and we must press ahead and all these deals have been done, the contracts have been signed and, you know, the Sir Humphreys have done all their deals with the wind companies.
Strike prices pre-agreed, all this sort of thing.
You've got a situation where they're charging when contracts are done in terms of allocation of money, as the civil service do, they charge out a tonne of CO2 at 250 quid, whereas you can actually offset it for $10. So you've got all these projects being like loaded with cash. Why? You know, we're going to be doing a lot of investigation. We've got lots of FOI requests at the moment going in. We're going to find out what's behind all these these deals. Who knows?
In the end, it's money. It nearly always is.
It's always money.
But I'm fascinated by this. You know, the boss of the GMB, not just the second biggest union, but major funders of the Labour Party.
Yes.
And the Labour Party gets something like 85% of its money now from the trade unions.
Yep.
Is there any other sign on the centre-left of politics of a move in people's thinking?
Well, absolutely. I'm not going to name many names, but one of the major donors, in fact, possibly the major donor to the Labour Party. Independent donor is very sceptical about net zero, very sceptical. Now, I'm not sure if he'd like to come out publicly and say that. Maybe he will after seeing me on this. But, yeah, there's definitely cracks. But I've heard through the grapevine, well, more than through the grapevine, but I'm not going to talk about specifics at the moment, that an equivalent of the net zero scrutiny group, but on the Labour side, has been formed. We have MPs they have MPs, I'm not non-partisan, but they have MPs that have already signed up because, you know, call me old-fashioned, but I thought the Labour Party was supposed to care about working people and, you know, God forbid, poor people. And they're the people who are, you know, going to be hit by this.
I just, you know, made the point with Lawrence Harr that it's the poor disproportionately paying for all of the renewables.
Absolutely.
And have
what
been
about
for a
the
long time.
blue-collar working-class jobs? I mean, if you haven't got fracking, that's why Gary Smith is saying this is ludicrous. If you haven't got fracking, where are the highly qualified working-class jobs? Oh, but we don't really care about them anymore.
Well, there could be tens of thousands of them.
Well, there could be, and there will be, hopefully. Liz Truss needs to get in there, but I'd just like to make a point. If the Tories don't sort themselves out and get fracking as soon as possible, this is an open goal for Labour. It really is.
It would be if they had the courage to go for it.
Well, absolutely. But, you know, different parties have different motivations and you know better than I do how you can manipulate that. So, you know.
Lewis Perry, really interesting. I have to say, the boss of the GMB thinks we should start producing more energy in this country. That is an interesting straw in the wind. And as soon as that Labour group that Lewis has talked about gets formed, please, you're welcome to come on this programme and talk about it, because that would be really, really important. In a moment, we'll go back to the English Channel. What the hell is going on? And how is it we have to accept everyone that comes, and yet the Greeks are turning back migrants in their thousands? All of that in just a moment. Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh, my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Coming up on Dan Wootton Tonight, as Meghan Markle once again makes headlines across the globe, with a Poor Me podcast lashing out at the royals and branding herself a victim of sexism, her anti-woke sister and biggest critic Samantha gives her exclusive and no-holds-barred review. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. to 11 p.m. on GB News.
Our energy bills are much too high, and guess what, folks? You are paying the price, and many big, rich, multinational corporations are the beneficiaries. But in particular today, Boris Johnson suggesting in Kiev that we'll just have to put up with the cost of living crisis because we are backing Ukraine against Putin. I asked you, are you prepared to pay that price? Stuart says, nope, I already pay far too much like many others. Stephen says, try saying that when people are being carried out of their homes as stiff as a board because they've died from the cold and can't afford to pay the gas bill. Yeah, you know, cold kills a lot more people than hot heat, and goodness knows what this winter may bring. One viewer says, out of touch as always. Dave says, the cost of living crisis that has been caused by the pathetic response to COVID, furloughing people for 2 years, what do you expect? Well, that's sort of broader criticism of government there, I think. Now, to the English Channel, where today at least 400 had crossed as we went on air with this programme. We can show you some footage of what was going on in Dover Docks earlier on today. At least 400, another boat of 50-odd on the way. Calm conditions. I wouldn't be surprised at all if the boats didn't come literally all through the night. And we've learned that of the 1,295 that we know about that crossed the channel on Monday, 700 of them were Albanians. This is an invasion. It's the only word I can use. And it isn't just a crisis, it is an emergency. You know, I've been talking to people with links in Albania. They tell me literally young men are leaving the country in droves. You know why? They're joining the criminal drugs gangs in this country. We are literally, there's no question about whether these people are refugees. They are not. We are literally now directly importing criminality on a huge scale. It is quite astonishing. And I don't understand why we don't just deport all 700 from Monday immediately. Seems to me we're entitled to do so. Well, joining me is Ivan Sampson, immigration lawyer. Now, you know, clearly Albania, we're talking about a NATO member, prospective EU member. Sunday newspaper magazines full of advertisements for Albanian hotels and resorts, and it's a country pretty much at peace, and they're coming here illegally. Why aren't we deporting them?
Well, the biggest problem is identity, because we don't know that they are from Albania. You need identity documents, and you need cooperation from the Albanian government to receive them back. That's the biggest problem. Now, if they claim asylum, we have a duty under the Refugee Convention to consider their applications. So that has to be done as well. So I'm afraid we can't simply just deport them back or remove them.
So how many tens of thousands are going to come in the next few weeks? I mean, what are we going to do, Ivan?
The trend is, over the last 8 years, it's increased by 8-fold.
Yes.
So over the next 8 years, I think you could see several thousand a day coming over. Our borders at the moment are determined by the weather. We have no control of the borders. And also, we have no control over who's coming. Background checks of who these people are, whether they've got previous criminal convictions.
But they throw away their ID documents. I mean, I filmed in May. I filmed iPhones and documents being thrown into the English Channel once they crossed our 12-mile line.
I wrote to Rishi Sunak recently and said that nobody should be allowed to step onto British soil without an identity document. Because we don't allow people through the ports. If you haven't got a passport, you can't get in. And there should be offshore processing centres. Because once they touch land, they've got to where they want to get to. But what do we do with them? Do we send them back? What do we do? Do we send them back across the channel?
Well, you've got good connections within the Conservative Party. You know, this is a major crisis. For them, not just for the country, but for them it's a major crisis because, you know, the big promise of Brexit, take back control of our borders, it clearly, you know, you as an immigration lawyer are saying we have effectively no border controls. What is the next Prime Minister going to do?
We need a deal with the French. We need to do some horse trading with the French, find out what they want. We need to have the right person to do that negotiations. Look, before we left the EU, we were returning 70,000 people a year. Under the Dublin Convention.
Yeah, but we still had to accept an awful lot.
We did. But those who came across, who could have claimed or had claimed before, we were at least returning them to France. In the withdrawal agreement, that should have been negotiated and something akin to Dublin should have been in there. And that was, no one was doing the thinking at the time.
So
and we missed an opportunity.
I mean, I get the point you're making about we need to do a deal with the French. And I mean, Tony Smith, the former head of Border Force, has sat in that chair and made the same argument. What if the French won't do a deal? Is that when we have to consider a Tony Abbott-style solution?
Possibly, but we need to re-look at the Refugee Convention. If you want to control asylum seekers coming to the UK, we need to re-look at that. Look, it can't be done by us alone. It can't be done by even totally putting a deal with the French. The UNCHR needs to get involved. There needs to be a global solution to this. Look, we've got 18 million refugees in the world. And look, Afghanistan, 30,000 children without food today. They're going to keep coming. So every country has to take their fair share. The perverse thing is, though, that if we do stop the boat crossings and we take people coming through safe legal routes, it's probably going to increase our annual refugee numbers by fivefold.
But that's up to us to make those decisions.
Absolutely.
That's up to us to make those decisions. And I would suggest that not just ECHR is unsuitable, but actually the UN definition of who a refugee is it's over 70 years old, and maybe these rethinking. But we'll debate that again, Ivan. We absolutely will. A thought for you. In Greece, over the last couple of days, on their border with Turkey, they've been there, the Greek police, the army, they have literally physically repelled and pushed back 1,500 people trying to get into Greece. They've been using similar tactics at sea, you know, going out literally pushing boats round and saying, you're not coming here. How is it that Greece can defend its borders and the United Kingdom can't?
Well, they're not complying with their international treaty obligations. First of all, they have a duty under the UN Convention on the Laws of the Sea, UNCLOS, to rescue people at sea. They can choose to ignore it because it's politically...
And that's what they're doing.
And that's what they're doing. And also not accepting refugee applications. That's a breach of the Refugee Convention. I mean, the European Court of Human Rights on the 7th of July did an expose where they criticised Greece for doing that. Now, do we do that? That's the question.
Well, I never thought I'd advocate becoming like the Greeks, but at least they're standing up and defending their borders. Look, what I'd like to do, I'm not for breaking international treaties, I'm not for breaking international rules that we've agreed to, I'm all for changing them, and I think that's where I am on this. And
I agree with you. The Refugee Convention was set up for political asylum.
Yes.
So people who are seeking refuge being persecuted by their government.
Yes.
I'm afraid it's changed now to armed conflict, civil conflict, and that's not the purpose of the Refugee Convention.
And even poverty by some people's definition, which is billions of people.
And that's not the purpose why we signed up to it.
Ivan Sampson, we always have a fascinating conversation. I'm not sure we quite agree, but that's not the point. We have a good conversation, and thank you very much indeed for joining us. Well, there was yet another hustings last night. Now, I know you're getting very, 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 very bored with the hustings and possibly be quite bored with the blue-on-blue attacks, but gosh, it is important. That date of September the 5th is getting closer. Dan Falvey is Deputy Digital Political Editor for the Daily Express and is, of course, following all of this like a hawk. Interesting big point about Boris today. You know, the cost of living crisis, he said we'll have to endure the pain because we're supporting Ukraine and we're prepared to pay this price. Quite a bold thing for a Conservative, albeit leaving, but for a Conservative Prime Minister to say, isn't it?
Absolutely. This is the war in Ukraine. I think most people in Britain think that we should be standing up to Putin and standing by Ukraine. But this wasn't a war that Britons chose to fight. It's not policies they've chosen to go with, and yet they're the ones paying the cost. The government has made the decision on behalf of the British people that the British people are willing to take that cost. Not the government. We're not doing it through them. We're going to put it onto the ordinary people of Britain. And Boris Johnson has decided, without any real kind of consent from the general public, that they're willing to do so.
And it's forget the 2.3 billion we've given Ukraine. It's the cost on businesses and households of these rising prices. I wonder what Liz Truss or Rishi Sunak will do on Ukraine. I guess a similar policy, though I sense the EU policy is changing.
We've seen there are fractures within the EU. Different EU states now have different opinions of what to do. It's interesting, given that energy prices are going up so much, we've seen a lot of talk from Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss about what they'd want to do to help with that. But in terms of the actual broader point about Ukraine, it's virtually been absent from the campaign. You could argue that that's because they're in agreement, but what does that actually mean? We saw Vladimir Zelensky said when this started that he was worried that his friend Boris was going. He was worried about what that would mean. And yet that's a question that seems to have been left fairly unanswered by both of them.
Dan, your newspaper has been quite strongly supportive of the Conservatives and still is supportive of the Conservatives. I sort of put to you, do you have any idea how much trouble they're in with this cross-channel crisis?
Well, polling shows it's the second most important issue to Conservative voters. And one of the things that we've seen since 2019 is repeated rhetoric about what they're going to do. We saw that once we'd got the withdrawal agreement over the line, that would make a difference.
It hasn't.
It hasn't. We saw that then there's going to be the new plan for immigration published last year. That would make the difference.
It didn't.
It didn't. So now we've got the Rwanda scheme. We're told we'll implement this Rwanda scheme and that will make the difference. As we saw, it's still not happened because we've now got the European Convention of Human Rights and they're now saying we'll leave that and then it'll all be fine. The danger is...
But they're not really saying we'll leave that, are they? They're kind of saying the British Bill of Rights will deal with it.
They're threatening to... They're saying that they'll introduce the British Bill of Rights and, if necessary, they'll go further. The danger is, though, they're promising an awful lot to their voters who want action on this, and they keep walking up the hill to have to walk them all the way back down again. And all the time we're getting closer and closer to a general election. And at some point, that's going to catch up with them. The danger is we hit an election... They haven't solved the problem, and all those voters, particularly in the Red Wall, where it's a big issue for them there, we're going, hold on a minute, you promised to sort this out.
And you promised it again and again and again, over-promised and under-delivered. Now, Dan, I can see that absolutely clear as well. Bizarre, isn't it? Boris Johnson in Kiev, the Deputy Prime Minister at a play park in West Sussex, two leadership contenders going around the country. Is anyone running the country?
Well, let's give Boris Johnson some credit here.
Oh, that's right. He's just been to Greece on holiday, having been in Slovenia a couple of weeks before.
Boris Johnson never wanted to leave office. Let's not forget that. And he said...
But he's still in office.
But he was planning to introduce this great plan for the cost of living that then couldn't be delivered because he can't tie his successor's hands. If he was still in power, all these calls that we're getting from Labour and from some backbench MPs that we need a plan now would have been delivered in July. It was the backbench Tory MPs and Labour who were calling for a general election. If there was an election right now, we wouldn't be having anything put forward.
So we let Boris off, do we?
Well, we need to obviously hold everyone to account, but I think it's fair to say that Boris Johnson could have been doing something right now if it wasn't for the actions of Labour and his backbench MPs.
All right, I won't fight you on that, but I won't fight you on that one in particular. But it does sort of look to me like Theresa May spent her last days in office putting through things like the net zero legislation, which I abhor, but she was busy. He's just been enjoying himself, I think. Final thought. I think we're all getting bored to death with the leadership debate. Hustings after hustings, we're all asking ourselves, why the hell's it taking so long? Have there been any significant shifts in position this week?
To be honest, absolutely not. We've seen last night Liz Truss said that she was talking about shifting money from the NHS towards social care. that's already kind of in the plans that have been outlined. Rishi Sunak, when he was Chancellor, was talking about doing that. It's been made a big news story today. That's partially because there's so little new elements coming out of these that any small announcement makes big news.
I tell you what, Dan Falvey, when somebody who works as a deputy political editor for The Express tells you there's no news, there really is no news in terms of anything fresh, and we thank you very much indeed for joining us. Sticking with energy, my What the Farage moment just has to be this Just Stop Oil group. I mean, just extraordinary. I mean, there they were yesterday, you know, trying to block oil terminals, gluing themselves to roads. And we saw the police going up, and when there was a chap there, 63-year-old Mark Coleman, a retired vicar, and the police are giving him water, and I mean, virtually saying, you know, jolly well done for blocking up Grays in Essex. Well, today, Just Stop Oil out in force again at 3 service stations on the M25. Have a look. Those of you watching this on television, have a look at their behaviour. And for those of you listening on radio, they have got hammers and they are smashing up petrol pumps. Smashing up petrol pumps to make them completely unusable. Now, these people are utterly deluded in every way if they think somehow we're all going to be, in a couple of years, using electric cars, because it isn't going to happen. Point that was made earlier by our guest, we only produce 1% of global CO2, so maybe, boys and girls, go to Beijing and smash up Beijing. I'm sure you'll have a wonderful time over there if you do that. But what are our police thinking? Why are we pandering and appeasing people who, within 24 hours, are going out and causing serious criminal damage? Now, I'll be joined in a moment by a veteran Fleet Streeter, Paul Connew, and I'll probably actually go back through the programme with him and get his take on what's happening in this country today. Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of 2 wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
We are GB News, the People's Channel, and we are absolutely everywhere. Yes, we're on TV, radio and digital. And if you're a Virgin Media customer, well, we're now even easier to find. With GB News moving to channel 604. Don't forget, we're channel 216 on Freesat, 515 on Sky, 236 on Freeview and 236 on YouView. Join us on GB News, the People's Channel.
Welcome back. It is my favourite time of the day. Yes, of course it is. It's Talking Pints. I'm joined by veteran Fleet Street. I won't call you a hack. That's a bit derogatory.
That's very kind of it.
Well, no. You were, of course, editor of the Sunday Mirror, deputy editor of the News of the World. Paul Connew, welcome to Talking Pints. Now, you go back to the days when it actually was Fleet Street.
Yes, indeed. In fact, and the days when Boris Johnson was a young Brussels reporter. In fact, and Boris and I, should we say, I am not an admirer of Boris Johnson, as a new book I'm one of the authors of out this week, in fact, shows Boris Johnson, media creation, media clown, and media casualty with a question mark. And I think the image on the front of this book, which I think you've got somewhere, will
it's on the screen,
will actually contrast with Boris's photo op today in Kyiv. Now, actually, in a recent book we did back in June, in fact, reporting the Ukraine war, for once I did praise Boris, because I think he has been at the front, of the European effort in support, of Ukraine.
They fell in behind him, effectively.
Yes. Although I think the Ukrainian media have kindly overlooked something that Boris said, which you may well remember, in the 2016 referendum campaign. Boris mitigated for Putin over the 2014 annexation of Crimea, partly blaming the EU for it. But I think people have conveniently forgotten that. Well, he does his faux Churchillian rhetoric now. But he has been right, on Ukraine.
As a journalist, Boris Johnson wrote very entertaining columns for the Daily Telegraph. They were popular in the newspaper. He went on, of course, to become the editor of The Spectator, one of the oldest political magazines in existence.
Although his old boss Andrew Neil thinks very little of him now, and compares him to Donald Trump, in fact, recently.
And we will come to Trump in a moment. And we will, I promise. But he actually was, whether you like him or not, he was a successful journalist.
He was. But although he was a man who didn't... A witty phrase was often carried more with Boris than accuracy and truth, and remember things like pickaninnies and and bum boys, or bum bag boys, in fact, etc. Now,
but you know what? He was writing for. I mean, he was as much an entertainer in print as he was a news journalist, wasn't he?
But one of the problems is if you put a journalist / entertainer into Downing Street, it hasn't worked.
I've been a sceptic. I mean, and people who watch and listen to this show thought I was being highly critical, but I made the point 8 months ago that he wouldn't survive as Prime Minister. I could see this series of disasters and catastrophes coming. And yet, the truth of it is, Boris will be off to America within a few days of giving up the premiership, and he'll make loads of money, won't he?
He will do, although I still suspect he wants to be a player and an influencer in British politics. And in a sense, Liz Truss, who almost certainly is going to be following him into number 10, is the continuity Boris candidate.
I'm not sure she's continuity. I don't think.
Yes.
I mean, she shoots from the hip in terms of what she says more than Boris Johnson.
Yeah, I mean, one anecdote in the book, which dates back to 1990 for me, was when I was a young senior executive on the News of the World. Boris was the thrusting young Brussels correspondent of the Daily Telegraph. We were investigating his old Etonian chum, Darius Guppy, involved in a major fraud scandal, and Boris was asked by Guppy to get hold of the reporter involved's address so Guppy could send round a couple of heavies to beat him up. Boris, in fact, far from being horrified by this, was relieved when he was told he'd probably only get a sort of, a cracked rib or two. But that showed the sort of thinking of Boris Johnson. His editor at the time was, of course, now Sir Max Hastings, and who is now one of the strongest critics of Boris you can imagine. But he only censored Boris and gave him a ticking off. I often wonder now if Sir Max doesn't wonder if he'd given Boris the order of the boot, history may have been changed for the better.
And history is full of these sort of things, isn't it? Now, you mentioned Donald Trump a moment ago, and I know that you worked in America, in print, for British newspapers, working in America, 70s, 80s, and came across the Donald.
The Donald, before he was toying with politics at the time, but not really addressing it. At the time, I knew him quite well. His aspirations were to oust Don King as the biggest boxing promoter in the world, and to run the biggest casino empire in the world, which didn't end very well, of course, on either front.
How did you find him?
I found him entertaining, but also chilling. Completely self-obsessed, but you've got to know him more recently, and also, if you told me that one day he would become the most powerful figure in the world as President of the United States, I'd have summoned men in white coats to come and take you away. So it's quite extraordinary, and the danger is, it's not out of the question, provided he's not in jail, which he deserves to be, in my view. But in fact,
no.
But in fact, he could well return.
Well, I think he may well do, because the Democrats are in one hell of a mess. They're in one hell of a mess. They've got a leader that shouldn't be there, a deputy who's even more unpopular than the leader that shouldn't be there, no other obvious candidate. And actually, when you look at American cities, and we've got some lawlessness happening in our country, but goodness me.
But not on the scale of the insurrection at Capitol Hill, for which...
Well, hang on a second. American cities were ablaze after the George Floyd incident, and by defunding the police in those departments, we've seen huge rises in homicide and everything else. So there is serious fault on both sides in these American cities, isn't there?
Well, there are huge problems, but I think for a US president to behave as he did, leading up and effectively inciting what happened on Capitol Hill, I think is chilling.
He said, go in peace. I mean, you listen to what he said. He said, go in peace.
You look at the evidence being given by some of his former aides to the congressional inquiry.
Amazing stuff, like he tried to take control of the steering wheel. I mean, they're lies, aren't they? They're lies. They're nonsense.
You have more faith in him than I do, Nigel.
I think it was an ugly incident. It's a horrible thing.
I remember you being on the platform during his campaign against Hillary Clinton.
Yeah.
Can you see him wanted to have another Brit, Boris Johnson, on the platforms with him? I don't think Boris would. No. I think that's one courtship that Boris would actually not want to consummate.
I don't think he'd want Boris there, because I think he wouldn't think Boris was a conservative, and he's not really, is he? I mean,
he did famously or infamously what called Boris the Brit Trump, of course.
That was on day one. I was there. I was in the audience that day. Actually, it was an event that took place. It was in Washington, D.C. It was a big turning point students' event. And he called him that for a little bit, but not for very long.
But Andrew Neil, quite interestingly, compares Boris's reluctance to leave Number 10. Let's not forget it, in that rather pathetic resignation speech, from which he didn't even mention the R word. But his resentment at leaving has certain echoes of Trump refusing to.
That may be true, it may not. Paul, the way we get our news, the way we get our opinions, the way we form our own opinions, the way we, around a beer, debate things that we agree on, and you and I disagree on loads of stuff, but we can do it in a very civil...
Especially on Brexit.
Yeah, no, we'll come to that. But here's the point. Your days at News of the World, by the way, folks, well pre any hacking, so we get that in. Yes. And your days at the Mirror, and the newspapers were hugely powerful, and there were only a couple of television channels, and now we've got online media, increasingly growing. Do traditional media organisations survive the next 5 or 10 years with the online world?
A big challenge, and one of the factors you're finding now is that there used to be a clear dividing line between news and comment. You could have a ferocious partisan leader, or one of your columnists would be writing, a very opinionated column, But at times, and this is happening a lot around the Boris Johnson situation now, where pro-Boris newspapers are using terms like kangaroo court with regard to the Privileges Committee investigation, not in quotes, but
do we consume that? Do we consume that by buying the newspaper or by looking at it online? And if we're doing it online, what's to stop new competitors coming in?
There isn't, in fact, and I think we've got a lot of issues about. I mean, I'm both a strong critic of social media, while also being a strong supporter of it. And we did another book a couple of years ago called Anti-Social Media with a question mark. And although I still think social media's positives outweigh its negatives, the negatives are very dangerous. And you were talking earlier on, about crime and violence, and when you look at the knife incidents, you look at what you can buy. You can buy a machete online. You can buy the most lethal knives online. At least we can't, not America, you can't actually, in the UK, as far as I can see, you can't buy a submachine gun, in fact, online.
Not legally, but illegally.
Yeah.
And look at Liverpool a couple of days ago. And,
Yeah, and it's, and the Liverpool scenario was absolutely chilling.
So it is a very difficult, very flexible world in terms of where we're going to go with media, social media. Are the great giants going to survive? But I have to ask you this. When the Jimmy Savile case burst into full public view, people were shocked, horrified. I mean, I think we thought he was a bit weird, but did some wonderful charity. I mean, you know how he was really hailed as being this extraordinary figure. Now, you were one of the journalists who was sort of on his case a few years earlier.
I was the editor of the Sunday Mirror back in '94 when we came very close to being. We were legally thwarted in the end, very close to exposing Jimmy Savile. And
how close?
We had two very, very good victim witnesses. The only reason in the end that we couldn't publish was because one lost her nerve, not because she changed her story, but she said to me memorably, who's going to believe me? I'm a girl. I mean, by this stage she was a woman with children. Who's going to believe me, an approved schoolgirl, when Jimmy Savile, and I remember this verbatim his remarks, when Jimmy Savile is a friend of Prince Charles and Princess Diana and gets invited by Margaret Thatcher to Chequers for Christmas. And her husband didn't want her to actually, because the children didn't know that she'd once been an approved schoolgirl.
Lot to put yourself through as well.
And her friend then didn't want to go on her own. And every editor, every reporter has, the one that got away, the one that they feel bitter or even ashamed of to a certain extent that you didn't, but you weren't able to chat.
You got very close. Paul, a couple of minutes left. Final thoughts. You were against Brexit, but you read Brexit. You read it very, very well. You knew it would happen. You also understood that the Boris majority was very much. It wasn't just about Brexit. Corbyn was a real turn-off, and you've been a Labour supporter, but you couldn't support them under Corbyn.
I didn't. I left Labour temporarily up with Corbyn, and I predicted that Leave would win the referendum. After doing my own, DIY rough and ready research in the red wall areas that I thought would be decisive. Although it was rough and ready, it turned out to be more accurate than the big pollsters. But I went back to the same research database, to the same people, after the 2019 landslide for Boris, and it turned out that Boris wasn't particularly loved, quite the reverse. And quite a lot of people said they didn't support Boris, but they held Corbyn in greater contempt.
Yes.
And that, along with Get Brexit Done, but Get Brexit Done hasn't been done. Boris has got it technically across the line. But Brexit is, as the polls are now showing, whether you're a Leaver or a Remainer, Brexit isn't working.
It's unfinished business,
and in the book I suggest that Keir Starmer would be better off nicking the old Saatchi and Saatchi slogan for Maggie Thatcher back in 78 and 79, where it said Labour isn't working. It should be Brexit isn't working, with a picture of Boris Johnson, William Rees-Mogg. Probably not you, Nigel, because unlike Boris...
I was honest about it.
People close to Boris, including members of his family, will tell you privately that he was never really a Brexiteer. It was the way he saw the passport to fulfilling his prime ministerial
dream. This is the pub
dream.
conversation that would only end by last orders and being chucked out.
No.
I have to call time, Paul Cunningham.
Cheers.
Thank you very much. You see, GB News, we can agree to disagree and do it in a civil, grown-up way. That is what a democratic society should be all about. Time for a couple of quick barrage the Farages. One viewer asks, what percentage of the politicians in Westminster are actually politicians and not careerists? Two types of people in politics: those who want to be something, those who want to do something. The vast majority, not all, the vast majority are there because they want to be something, and that means climbing the greasy pole. Jane asks me, have you ever thought about doing a Christmas panto? If so, what would be your ideal part? No, I've never thought about doing a Christmas panto, but I think being me, whatever it was, I'd have to be the villain in some way, and I'd really rather enjoy that. Well, some very spirited debates and conversations tonight on the show, and I have to say, the thought that a British Prime Minister can say, yeah, we'll pay the price to support you without doing anything to increase our own energy supply is, I think, a bit shameful. Over to you, Mark.
He wasn't being honest, folks, about Panto. He was Widow Twankey in Cleethorpes in 2007. There's video. Google it. Thank you very much, Nigel. Great show. We actually have a good news story coming up on the show because man cannot live by total societal collapse alone. So we've got a terrific good news story, but we'll do the usual gloom and doom leading up to it. All coming up after the weather.
Hi there. It's Aidan McGivern from the Met Office here. A warm night to come for some places following a hot and humid day in the southeast, but heavy rain and thunderstorms overnight and into the morning will clear the air. A weather front is crossing the country, albeit slowly. Associated with this weather front, some heavy and persistent rain, and eventually that will arrive into the southeast. But at first, through the evening, it's dry in East Anglia and the southeast, just one or two showers developing later. The main area of rain affecting the Midlands, Wales and the southwest, that pushes southeast, and by the end of the night, the heaviest rain is pushing into the southeast, where it's a warm night to come, 18 to 21 Celsius, while Scotland, Northern Ireland and eventually West Wales, the far southwest, sees clearer and fresher conditions arrive. So a wet start to the day for East Anglia and the southeast, some thundery rain for a time. Eventually the rain does peter out, and by later in the afternoon it's mostly dry. It's also turning brighter, and there'll be plenty of sunny spells for northern western England, Wales. With fresher air coming, it's looking like a return to average temperatures. But for Scotland and Northern Ireland, here there'll be a scattering of showers, especially towards the northwest, along with a keen breeze. Areas of more persistent rain pushing into the west of Scotland and Northern Ireland during Thursday evening. A lot of clear skies elsewhere, although West Wales and the far southwest will see some showery rain turn up by dawn. A more comfortable night for sleeping, though, with temperatures mostly holding up at around 12 to 15 Celsius. Then a bright start to the day for East Wales, much of central and eastern England. Northern Scotland also faring well for sunny spells first thing Friday. Otherwise, areas of cloud slowly drifting in from the west, along with some showers. Most of those showers affecting southern Scotland, where they will be of a heavy nature. Saturday and Sunday sees high pressure builds, so drier and brighter for many away from the northwest.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me.
And then for the last 15